Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Church Talk Podcast with Rob and Jason. We're so glad that you joined us today. Hope you're having an amazing day. I don't know when you're listening to this. It might be a Tuesday, it might be a Sunday, maybe you're skipping church. I don't know. But we're glad that you took a little time. Yeah, because it's going to be we got a great conversation lined up. Looking forward to it. Rob, how you doing, man?
I am good. So we had a guest recently. I already called her out, so I don't need to name names again. But before we hit record, she confessed to you and I that she had listened to like a dozen episodes just to prepare, just to kind of get a feel for what kind of podcast we were, who you and I were, which was great. Maybe the first podcast guest in the history of the world who's ever done that amount of kind of research and prep work. Which, hey, kudos to her. But
And she still
she
joined us.
she did, which is kind of a
Yeah,
miracle in and of itself. But
absolutely.
she totally like knows that we love golf and talk about golf and all those kinds of things. And so she just she said, yeah, like your mediocre golf games. And like, in that moment, I don't know about you, but in my heart and mind, I kind of thought to myself, well, we may have to like pull the plug on this episode before we even record it.
Well, I
Because
mean,
she just
actually, I didn't publish it. I just deleted her.
deleted it. Good. Well, I
Yeah.
mean, that's probably good. It's probably good. No, I'm just kidding. But, if you've listened for a while, you know that Jason and I love golf. And I've actually now for years been one of the high school golf coaches. And my oldest son actually played his senior year before he went to college. But it was only because he was dating a girl and she told him that he was going to be on the golf team with her. And like his whole life, I tried to get him to play golf. I bought him kid sets and I mean he would sort of placate me for 10 minutes, but that was about it. But his younger brother has been interested in golf, and as a little kid I remember going to driving ranges with him and again buying him sets that he actually wanted to use and did use. And so last year he was on the junior high golf team, and this year he's on the junior high golf team. He's an 8th grader for this coming year, and so they've started practicing. Well, they have their first away match coming up, and Liam qualified in the top 6. And
Nice.
so this coming Monday, he will do that. And it's funny because he's also in a play and he has the lead role in this play. But yesterday when I got word he qualified in the top 6, I'm like, hey, listen, like I totally get that you're going to prioritize because your play is going to come and go here pretty quickly. It's your last junior high theater production, but you're committed to 2 things right now. And so I'm like, what does that look like? And it, like, because yeah, you can't let the people you're in the play with down, but also if you qualify as one of the top golfers, in essence, you're also letting your team down if you just never participate, for the next month. And so I'm like, it's probably easier to miss a play practice early on in the process as opposed to right before showtime. So after, again, I wasn't like trying to push. I just wanted him to think through, you've committed to multiple things. What does it look like to have some level of equity there? And so last night when the coach texted to say that Liam had qualified in the top 6, we had that conversation and he decided to play. So I actually had paid a couple $100 for this thing I was supposed to go to on Monday. I gave that to a friend. So I'm going to go to this. And actually this morning, he and I spent a couple hours at the driving range, just trying to work on some things for his game. So it's just kind of fun to see, this continuing with at least 50% of my progeny.
Yeah, well, I've given up on any progeny from me, unless one of my two grandsons
Yeah,
decided.
you got influence there, dude.
I do. So there's chance there. One just last week turned 5, and the other one is 6, and he'll be 7 in October. So,
Mm.
I mean, I think I was 7 when I started playing golf. So, I mean, it's terrible, but it didn't matter. I had fun, and yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
And
what I like about that is, helping him prioritize, right? Or helping him understand that there's complexity, especially in a low commitment or a low consequence stage. Like, I mean, it's not like the world's going to end or World War III is going to start if he missed one thing or made a bad choice there, but it helps him learn the process of making a choice. And
yeah,
to me, that's like, man, if we can equip our kids to actually make choices that and understand there are consequences to the choices, of any kind. I think I don't know, that if a parent can do that, they're winning.
Well, and I think too, you're absolutely right. Like, let's give our kid, let's not make all of our kids' decisions. Let's give them enough rope to hang themselves, so to speak, in ways that the consequences aren't significant. But I think historically speaking, like last year, if he had qualified, he just would have been like, "Well, I'm one of the leads in the play, so like the theater always wins." And I'm like, I understand that. That makes sense. There's like 25 kids on this golf team, right? So there's plenty of kids that can step in and play. It's not really a big deal either way. But life is full of choices and trade-offs. And, I mean, you and I know this. We have opportunities all the time that we have to say yes or no to. And it's like, I would love to do everything, but there's just no way. Like there's not enough hours in the day. So what an important skill. And I think, and this kind of probably leads into some of the aspects of the conversation we're gonna have today. But one thing that's fun is even when he was a little boy, and I'd take him to the driving range with his little kid set of clubs, and he'd just kind of swing away. And occasionally he'd make contact with the ball. He more so than many had decent hand-eye coordination and could hit the ball and could make it kind of go a decent distance in a semi-correct direction. And last year, his first year on the team, I mean, I wanted him to be better, but like, he was certainly way better than when he was a kid. And having gotten some instruction, some things like that. And now, just a year later, as he's kind of growing into his body more and those types of things, and another year of just working and reps and those kinds of things, he's better, right? And I just think, what a beautiful picture of discipleship, what a beautiful picture of the kingdom of God. Like, you know what? For all of us, when we start something, the first number of reps, we're gonna probably be terrible. Even if we have some latent ability, we're just not gonna be good at it. But when we stick with things and we continue on for weeks and months and years and decades, really there is kind of an upward trajectory and we do get better with more practice.
Well, it's our friend Shane Stacy from Clarity House. He was talking to me one time, and he made the statement. He said, anything worth doing is worth doing poorly at first.
Yeah.
And yeah, and I think there's some truth in that, right? Of hey, yes, we are not going to get it perfectly right. I mean, if you go back and listen to the first 10, 15, maybe 20 episodes of the podcast, we were figuring it out, and we were making this stuff up as we go. And you know what? If you listen, we're at episode just over 200. You listen to episode 400 in a couple years, it's gonna hopefully be better than this episode. But that doesn't mean we wait until, 2 years from now or 3 years from now to start, because you don't get better by waiting. You get better
Yeah.
by doing, learning, and you continue moving. And
And
there's
reflecting.
definitely a lesson in there.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, because the reps are super important, right? Continuing to do it, but also kind of having feedback. Like there was a reason we went to the driving range today and I was giving him some things to think about. And even and I wasn't doing it in like a heavy-handed way. I felt the weight of this with everything that came out of my mouth. I'm like, man, if I have like 5 swing thoughts in my head when I stand over the golf ball, I'm probably gonna hit a bad shot, right? So I'm giving him, I know I'm giving him too much information, but like I'm telling him, hey buddy, like I don't want all these things to be in your head, but like here are some things that need to at least be on your list. And then even when we left the golf course, I'm like, hey, what are one or two things that were helpful from that you're like, oh, I need to think of this. I hit some good shots when I was focused on this. And he gave me a couple things. And so I know, like, yeah, just doing it, especially if you have bad habits or you've been doing it poorly, may ingrain some things that aren't helpful, but actually doing the work and getting some feedback and reflecting on how I can improve this. We do this all the time. Like we're talking about elements that we've tried or elements that we'd like to try or things we'd like to do just to be more clear, more thoughtful, and more effective, in this endeavor. And it's true with everything in life.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And as pastors, we need to one be willing for the feedback loop, which is
Mm,
sometimes very hard, right? To get feedback on whether it's your leadership style or your preaching or teaching or whatever it is. Sometimes that can be a difficult thing to hear, But man, it can make all the difference if you're willing to listen and and obviously not everything that everybody says is right. I mean,
Yeah.
I've had people tell me things and I'm like, you have no clue what you're talking about, but I'll listen and smile and politely ignore everything you say.
Oh, that's so good. And I remember a friend of mine, he graduated from the same college I went to a number of years before me. And he and I were youth pastors in the same area for years, and we played golf together. And I don't think he's still in ministry. And I think what I'm about to say, may have he's also had a lot of health concerns and things like that. But I still remember talking to him. I was probably in my mid 20s. He was probably in his late 20s. And he said to me, man, he goes, like, when I was in college, I just hated reading like books, anything. He said, when I graduated from college, it was the happiest day of my life because I knew I would never, ever again have to or actually read a book. And I just remember, and I mean, to this day, I love this guy, but like it's something gripped my heart. It's like saying you're going to be a teacher, you're going to teach kids, but you're never going to like expose yourself to new thoughts, new techniques, new information, continuing education, like training, all those kinds of things. It's like, you know, man, if we aren't continuing to read and learn and grow ourselves, man, we are just going to run out of stuff to pour into the people who are under our care.
Yeah. Which I think brings us to the topic we were going to kind of talk about today, the idea of new things. So a couple weeks ago, I preached at the little church that I attend here in Delaware. And, you were on study break or not, you're on vacation for the whole
Yeah,
month of
thanks.
July. Yeah. Let's call it what it is. And yeah, and there's nothing wrong with that. If anything, I'm jealous, and so you just showed up on that Sunday morning without telling me you were coming. And which was, I mean, it was a pleasant surprise because I actually do like seeing you.
You did
But
inadvertently invite me. You did say you were a couple weeks early, or you said you were preaching, and you just, I think, in passing said you can go if you want to, and I
yeah,
made a
well,
mental note, and
I also didn't like, you only get 4 Sundays off in that time frame. And, I don't want you to waste one, driving all the way down to Delaware. But so you showed up, and obviously the church that I attend and that, I was preaching that day, and I'm not a regular preacher. I'm not on staff. I don't have any positions there. We just attend when I'm in town. And it's very different from the church you pastor. I mean, like stylistically, probably some theological things that, are a little different, but
probably
that's okay. Yeah, there are some, but that doesn't mean you and I differ. That just means the church I attend, has some things in their background that we don't. But either way, the point is it's different. And I just thought today it might be fun to just talk through some of the stylistic and even approaches, the differences, and what's important, what's not. What do we learn from these? Because I think a lot of the pastors, I know when I was, planted a church in church for 33 years, I rarely attended a church that I wasn't on staff at. I mean, if I was on vacation, quite honestly, I didn't want to go to church. Like, I wanted a Sunday to go play golf or sit at the
yeah.
beach or, and it kind of felt this guilty pleasure of a Sunday not being at church. And so it's not like I visited a whole bunch of churches. And so now that I'm not and I am visiting, I'm, I think I'm growing as a leader and a pastor because I'm seeing all these different things, but I'm noticing a ton of nuances and differences that I think a lot of the pastors and maybe even the listeners of this podcast, they just don't get to experience that.
Mm.
And so I thought it'd be fun just to walk through some of that. And maybe first of all, I'll just ask you, like, obviously the church you lead, I would say, is very contemporary. I mean, from the setup of the building to the style of ministry to the style of worship to the preaching, the way you preach, the way it's very contemporary. I mean, I've preached there multiple times, and it is, I would say right off the bat, New Hope is a place I walk in, you can sense the love of Jesus in that place. I don't care what the style is. It's clear the Holy Spirit's moving. Those people love Jesus, and that's wonderful. But then you walk in, to the church, it's a 150-year-old building. There are pews, slanted floor. There's an organ with the pipes. There's no lighting other than the lights are either on or off. And then there's stained glass windows. There's no hazer. at all, except for the candles that sometimes smoke a little, you know.
That have the
So it's
little
just,
like little wick that you kind of snuff out and
yep.
yeah.
Yep. They had that. So I'm just, so you walk in, what are some of the thoughts that went to your head as you walked in?
Yeah, well, and like you say, I mean, obviously, just complete opposite ends of the spectrum, just in terms of stylistic kind of ministry. But I loved actually what Reverend Ruth Perry said, one of our recent guests, when she just like was talking about like the idea of like she said listening, but when you're just open, when you have a sense of openness to what God may or may not be doing in another place or another person, and just because it doesn't look like you think that it should look like doesn't mean that God is not up to something there. And I think so many times for all of us, we can have this tendency to like view other things through that lens of, well, I figured this out when we added four of those $8,000 motion lights in the hazer, our attendance went up by 23% the next year. And so obviously that's something that God wants to use everywhere, right? And so you walk in somewhere else and they're still using the highest piece of tech they have is the candle lighter slash putter outer contraption that has been around for 100 years, and you're like, well, obvious, we just sometimes walk around with much of a critical eye instead of just an openness. And so kind of with that in mind, even though it was like drastically different, and I knew that because you told me a little bit about it. But one of the things that you had mentioned, like I sensed right away. So, I parked in the little parking lot that I think is a community parking lot that the church uses on Sunday or whatever, or maybe it's the
It's
church's parking lot that
it,
they let the
it's
community use.
that's it.
There we Yeah. So I parked there. I walked in. As soon as I got to the door, somebody else was kind of going at the same time, and they smiled and were warm and friendly. I mean, for us, we have to have, I don't know, 20, 30 greeters on a weekend for both of our gatherings and all of our doors and our entrances to the auditorium and whatever. I'm pretty sure like maybe somebody is assigned that job, but it kind of is like, hey, there's few enough of us. So we're just going to all be greeters. And and that's how it felt like. Like I walked in, people noticed me, they smiled, they came up and talked to me. They were just sort of naturally friendly. Your wife Kristen was one of the first people I saw, so that was kind of cool. And she kind of pointed a few things out and told me where you were. So like you have said, like the place felt like the love of Jesus, and the people there smelled like Jesus. You know what I mean? Like you could tell that they loved each other and they loved God. And the fact that maybe we would not align on everything, theologically speaking, did not at all change that. And if I had wanted to focus on those things, maybe I would have missed how
Mm,
Christ-like these people in this place really was.
yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and I think there's, like you said, you guys need all these greeters because you have multiple doors and multiple services, and and yet I know, because I've walked into your church, dozens and dozens and dozens of times over the years, your people are all greeters in a way. Like I've been to churches where if you're not a greeter, you don't greet anyone at all. Like we got a team that does that, and so that's that is a culture, right? That you build. And I know a lot of churches that are friendly, but they're not necessarily relational.
Mm,
They can they're caricatures, I know, to the extreme, but yeah, and I do believe that's a thing that you have to cultivate in your people. And it doesn't matter if you're a church of 60 or a church of 600 or 6,000, cultivating that mindset of openness to them,
mm.
to anyone. That takes work and training and constant reminding of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and even as you're saying that, one of the things that I used to joke about, and now, my wife and I talk a lot about, since we have like a 20, just turned 21-year-old who's, going to a Christian liberal arts university and studying music and ministry and all those kinds of things. And it's amazing how many times he'll come home and he'll be like, "Hey dad, did you know?" And he'll say something that literally he has heard me say 1,000 times. And I'm just like, ugh. Yeah, and he acknowledges that too, and he's in a different place, and he's like in a learning environment, and he's hungry and he's growing, and that's different than I made that point this time and this time and this time and this time in a sermon that he was sitting in the room during, But my joke was always, like back when I was a youth pastor, this was true. Like there would be an idea, a concept that I would be trying to just get in the minds and hearts of the kids in my ministry. And it just seemed like they weren't getting it. And we go to some lock-in and some chucklehead, who's speaking at the lock-in would get up and say what I'd been saying for months or years and not even as well. And they'd all be like, "Whoa, like, yes." And they would get it and they would be like, "We've got to start doing this." And I could either celebrate that, hey, like I got to plant and or water and this person got to sort of reap the harvest a little bit, but it's really God who does all of it and just uses us anyway. Like I could go that way, or I could kind of get like bitter and cynical, and it's like, that person doesn't deserve this credit and they didn't even do it very, and it's like, man, like I really 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 do. Like even as I get older, and I've watched lots of people, the older they get, the more they get kind of cynical and critical, and they know they're right and they know everybody else is wrong. And honestly, that type of environment, that type of soil of a person's life, of a person's heart, of a person's mind, I don't see a lot of good kingdom things growing in those soils. But people who tend to be open and be like, God, if you're here, help me to see you here. And like I see God utilizing people in places like that just a lot more. And that's just the kind of person I always want to be. If I'm gonna mess it up one way or the other, I want to mess it up that direction.
Yeah. Yeah. I've always said if I'm gonna err, I'm gonna err on the side of grace, right?
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
yeah. Well, let me ask you this or pose this question. The Historically, the Protestant church shifted the focus of the worship gathering, starting with Luther, but I mean, over the last 500 years, it's developed, and especially when you get into the American church, and then even into the tighter stream of evangelical church, the climax of the service, right? The high point of the service for Catholics was always and still is the Eucharist, the
Eucharist.
literally the presence of Jesus in their midst. That was that's when you knew this was really a service, right? Because Jesus is here. Protestants basically shifted that to, we could say, the word of God, but really what we mean is the preaching of the word, right? Because I mean, the word doesn't just sit there, right? I mean, someone has to speak it. And so the preaching has really become the climax of an evangelical, type service today. But, the church where I've been going some, and where I preached there a couple weeks ago, I had 12 to 14 minutes for the sermon. I mean, it was not, usually when you and I preach anywhere, 30 minutes is like the minimum. You got
Yeah.
to start
Yeah.
there.
12 to 14 minutes is called the intro.
Exactly. Exactly. And so, yeah, but that's not the point of the service. Like, it's part of it. It's not that it's unimportant, but there are other aspects. And I don't know, what do you think? Like, what do we learn as, especially, a lot of our listeners would be more on that towards the evangelical side, not all of them, and that's fine, but where the service itself is about getting to the preaching of the word.
Mm.
What, I don't know, how did that affect you as you're sitting through the service and there's a ton of liturgy, a ton of, all the prayers. There was only two, what I would call extemporaneous prayers. And one was, as we wrapped up the prayers of the people, and the guy who was happened to be leading that day prayed. And then when I finished my message, I prayed. Like everything else, every other prayer, every other was recited, or, the congregation did as a whole. I don't know, what was your first thoughts or impact, or how did you feel in that situation?
So one of the things that I have always been just this is a personal thing. This is not like a something I push on others, but it is something that we practice at my church. Never, ever, ever like to publish the order of worship, because I know what it's like to go to a graduation ceremony or go to a funeral or whatever where that's published. And we all do this, right? Like, or even a play, like this is next and this is next. And it becomes this mental following to the end. Like, oh, only three more things and then we get to be done. And so I want people to lean into an experience as opposed to check boxes off until we kind of, get to be done and go on and do what we want. But as part of that, so you would think then maybe something that's a little bit more experiential and contemporary might create a better experience. But here's the other interesting thing that I think is a big part of that. People always say, you know, don't give people too much. Like if anything, keep them like make them. I wish that was longer. I wish I got more of that, right? And man, it was crazy how quick all of the elements felt. Like it did not even the open time where people could come up and give their praises and prayer requests. It just happened very, very quickly. So, I mean, you guys probably did 2 to 3 times more elements, than we would do maybe on a typical Sunday, but you did it in way less time. And so I thought that was really nice. Like it didn't feel like anything dragged on. And if anything, in some of those elements, I'd be like that was nice. I could have gone for more of that. And I think that, I mean, there's something for, you and I about a week ago hung out with a couple of pastor buddies of yours, and both of them kind of mocked you for being in a place where you preached like a sub 15-minute sermon. Like somehow that was like you'd almost maybe lost your salvation because no preacher worth his salt, couldn't and shouldn't preach that short. But yeah, no, I really, really thought that was kind of an interesting, unexpected, like, man, like I think in most environments we'd give people too much, and then if they complained about it, like, kind of chastise them as not being godly enough. But no, I felt like, man, I could have gone for more of these things. And so that was kind of an unexpected thing. But more to your point, I just feel like, there's lots of ways to do it. I think, yes, through communion, I think through preaching, but like, man, everything ought to, in my estimation, point and push people toward Jesus. And so maybe that's another way to, as opposed to, and I'm a preacher, and I was influenced a lot by Spurgeon. And one of my favorite Spurgeon quotes was this: there's no greater worship of God than the hearing of a sermon. So I like to bust that quote out every now and then. But man, yeah, there's plenty of sermons that are just like people blowing their own thoughts and hot air into the sky, not pointing people to Jesus. And I think that, you know, there's lots of ways to point people to Jesus, and everything ought to.
Yeah, yeah. There's something about, and I because I do travel around a lot, I sit through a ton of different styles of service. I mean, I was a few months ago. I on a Saturday night went to a Russian Orthodox prayer service. The very next morning, I was at a very large African American church in North Carolina. So like, less than 12 hours difference. I went from two extremes from a stylistic, perspective, but
Yeah.
they were both beautiful in their own way,
Yeah.
right? And so, but there is something about the recitation of things over and over within the context of a community that I find very reassuring, very helpful. It's funny. So that Sunday I preached, and later that week, a couple in the church had invited Kristen and me over to dinner. They just wanted to come hang out, whatever. And so we went over, and the one person was telling us about a very dark time in her life. Her husband died of suicide 5 years ago or so. And I mean, it was just really, really hard time. And she was started to attend an Episcopal church that was very liturgical, and she said, because she had grown up in a more, evangelical type setting, right? With the service was way more lively or whatever. But she said, I was afraid I'd be bored. But she said, the more I recited the creed and recited the Lord's Prayer, she said, I was at a point in my life where I couldn't pray. So to be able to, with the community of people around me, recite out loud the Lord's Prayer, often there were weeks that was the only prayer that I even said
Yeah.
because I just couldn't, and so there's something about that I think it grounds our faith in some things, that it's okay that we say it every week, and it's
Hmm.
okay that we all say it together, and it's not, I think there's a foundation there that really helps. And it kind of segues into the next concept I wanted to talk about is well, and I used to lead a church like yours, and our definition of participation was generally showing up and singing and then being nice to people, right? Like, and maybe serving somewhere, but really we gauge the effectiveness of the service by, this is a little simplistic, but how loud people sang, so to speak, right? I mean, like, were they into it was often a phrase that I would hear.
Yeah.
Where I go, like, it's three hymns, they aren't sung together, so there's no like flow, right? We sing a hymn to prepare us for the next thing, and then like it's just not a worship set like I'm used to. Uh, and participation is just measured differently. What are your thoughts on gauging the participation of the congregants in the worship gathering? What does that look like? And I don't know, what do you think honors God best?
Well, there's just like everything, right? There's tensions everywhere with all of this. So one of the things we would think, because we have an environment where we can control all the lights and everything, right? There's no natural light streaming in to our auditorium. We do like that people can kind of come in, sneak in, and hide where and in in our culture, just in general, if someone's a first time guest to church, walking into a brightly lit thing where everybody notices you, that can be a very big hurdle to overcome. So we try to minimize that hurdle a little bit and make it easier for people with some of those things. It's really not a we're into the darkness or anything of those kinds of things. So and I think that's okay. I think it's okay to do things like that intentionally for those reasons, where like when I walked in to your space, like virtually everybody noticed me. Many people welcomed me, which for me and my personality, that was fine. I could see for some people it's like I feel like fresh meat, and everyone's like, oh, you're new, like, right. So there's all of like just those different kinds of things. And I kind of feel like the thing that matters the most is just that we are seeking to honor God. Like that's the why behind the what we are doing. Cause, and we know this, like things change all the time. And I remember, like we were just talking, even in college, we did a pastoral ministries class, and the guy who was teaching it was like, you should always write out your pastoral prayer. And I remember this kid who sat right next to me, his name was Robin Briggio, and he was like, no, if you're not just saying it being led by the Spirit, it's lesser. And I'm like, well, yeah, except for the fact that when you pray and when I pray and when everybody prays, we tend to say the same things that we always say because that's what's in our mind and heart. And so if we write it out, we're probably going to be a little bit more intentional. We're probably going to be a little bit more focused. We're probably going to be a little bit more thorough, right? We might not be quite as impressive, but that's where even our friend and former co-host Courtney really helped us, because she, her orientation was way more orthodox. And
Mhm.
if I'm being honest, probably for like a lot of my adult life, I have viewed just some of those repetitive things as just a little bit lesser. But she really helped me to see how just some of that consistent foundation, we do these things and we say these things together, and they give us kind of this foundation, even in moments like you gave that beautiful illustration, right, where I don't have the words or the energy to come up with something on my own, but we as the community of faith have this shared foundation of the church and of our corporate worship. Man, like, just when you start to see and understand how powerful those things can become for people, like, again, that's not me saying that being completely led by the Spirit and just doing whatever versus like having liturgy and what, like, I just, why are you doing it? What is the intention behind it? And if we intend to, and we are actually helping people know and follow Jesus, like, honestly, like, I don't think God gives a rip about any of the stuff that we tend to get
Yeah.
all bent on a shape on.
Well, and I think part of it too is it's around this, again, it's a culture of invitation where people are invited to participate as a community in worshiping God. And the question isn't, so, like you said, it's not the how, the what are we doing? It's they're invited and then given space to do it. And there are some places where that space is really emphasized in the singing and the emotional engaging, right, of that worship experience. Then there are other places where it's more I participate by actually reciting or reading the creed or the statements or the call to
Hmm.
worship and these things. I participate really in just by speaking out loud, right, in the midst of this, the response to whatever's being said. And either way, the idea is it's an invitation to participate in the service, in the gathering. I do think there's a sense in which the church growth movement and the iteration after evolution of that into some of the things that are done now, it's become a show in a
Yeah.
lot of
Yeah.
places where your job as a congregant is to basically be quiet so the professionals can take care of this.
Yeah.
And so then it becomes a
Be the
very
studio
opposite.
audience, applaud when you're supposed to applaud. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think that dynamic is real. I've been in churches where it's like that, and you feel like, I think I was there. I was there, but I don't know if I participated other than I watched it. And that's I feel like that whenever I watch a service online, like people, oh, watch if you didn't make it, that's okay. Watch. I feel like I'm watching someone else do something. I'm not participating in it. And I'm not saying that's everyone's experience. That's just my experience.
Well, and I remember a buddy of mine who's a great pastor. He and his wife kind of grew up at this one church, big church in kind of the greater Grand Rapids area. And his wife was on the worship team. And she would tell stories of like when they were doing worship team practice, it was like, okay, when this word is said, you take one step forward and raise your right hand. Like it was that level of like, I'm going to tell you what to do slash production where, and she really struggled with that because she's like, I don't want to do it just because it will look a certain way or create a certain emotion if it's not like I'm happy to do that if that's what's authentically taking place in my heart and mind. Now again, I guess there's the other part too where it's like, well, if I'm a wreck, like I'm still up here leading others. So like there's a balance there too. But like here's the dirty secret that nobody wants to talk about. In terms of participation, if more people are showing up, so your attendance numbers are going up and up and up, and people are contributing financially so you can do things and buy things and pay for things, you know virtually everybody, the pastors, the leaders, the denomination, the community, everybody would go, oh man, that's a really successful, effective church because those observable metrics. Now it doesn't even matter how many people are coming and walking right out the back door. It doesn't matter if people's lives aren't really being changed. It doesn't matter if marriages aren't being saved. It doesn't even matter if people are like truly living for and following Jesus in greater ways. If the attendance and the giving and those types of things are increasing and people are like, whoa, like that is effective. Where I would say, like, regardless of whether it's a more liturgical kind of approach or whether it's a more, contemporary approach, like what I'm interested in is what do lives look like, a week, a month, a year, a decade after participating, not in that weekly experience. That's a part of it, sure, but in that community of faith. Because, yeah, we're going to learn some things. Like I always say that, like the weekend is more proclamation. We're gonna like declare the truth, but it's as we serve and it's as we engage in small groups and sort of wrestle with those truths and have conversations about what does living this look like, and how have some of us done it successfully and how have we struggled and what are some steps we can take. Doing those types of things over time really are the things that help us become not just participating in a 60 or 90-minute experience once a week, but like living the life in community with others, I think is really the power.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that. And that invitational culture, not of inviting friends, but inviting people to participate in the worshiping of our God in a gathered event, but then also in a scattered event, right? When
Yeah.
when 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 you leave the place, you continue worshiping in your participation of the Spirit in your day-to-day life, as we say, where you live, work, and play.
Yeah.
What does that look like? And yeah, I was meeting with the church recently, church leadership team, and multiple times I heard them say, that the preaching is great. We just can't get our people to bring people to it. And, and I was like, well, let's rethink that a little bit. Like, what if the objective is not to get them in to hear preaching? What if the objective is to send them out with the gospel? How would
Ooh.
that change the way you
Yeah.
do things?
Yeah.
And to me, that's what participation really, begins to look like. And go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, like, I kind of want to, since I did it here just 2 weeks ago, and I had like a real easy open door and a great reason, just because one of my, best buddies was like preaching at a church an hour and 5 minutes away from me, so like not a big deal. But I really do think, like, for everybody listening in, whether you're like a leader at a church, a volunteer at a church, whether you're a pastor at a church, the next time you're on vacation, the next time you're out of town and traveling, whatever, you know pop in to a church that is not yours. And I would even encourage you, like, go to a church that's doing things differently. Like, it's okay to go to a church that's like yours, that's fine. But like, go to a church, occasionally, that's like completely different, where you could probably make a list of 10 things easy, where you're like, I don't like this, I would never do that, I even disagree with it. Like, but don't do that. Like, look for 2 or 3 things that you could learn, and you'd like, man, I would love my church to look, feel, and smell like that. And so what are some things I could do, that we could do in my setting, to help, create that type of environment? I just think, man, we would all be better if we kind of learned and experienced those things together.
Yeah, I love that. Well, we appreciate you letting us have a conversation around this idea, and we hope you engage in exactly what Rob just said. I think that's a great challenge, and we'd love to hear stories. What was it like? Where'd you visit? How was it different? How was it the same? What stuck out? I love hearing those stories. So give us a shout. You can reach out to us through our website, through the show notes. There's links to reach out. Jason or Rob at churchtalkproject.com. We'd love to hear from you, and take a minute and share this, and subscribe to the podcast. That helps make sure more and more people hear about it. I know the next few weeks, our plan is to discuss some things around a church is successful when ... And so we're going to engage around some things that I've read and Rob knows, and we're working together, and it's going to be a lot of fun. So I hope you'll
When they
join
can
us.
afford expensive hazers
That's when they're successful. Or is
and
it the
motion
expensive
lights.
razor that makes you successful? See it like that.
Ooh,
I know it's really hard.
yeah.
I guess you'll just have to come back next week and find out. Oh, well, you have an amazing week. Thank you for listening. We look forward to talking to you soon. Have a great week.
Thanks for joining us today at the Church Talk podcast. We hope the conversation encouraged and challenged you. We would love to hear from you. Email your questions or comments to jason@churchtalkproject.com. The Church Talk podcast with Rob and Jason is brought to you by the Church Talk Project. We work to engage, equip, and encourage pastors and church leaders around the world. Thanks for listening.